welcome to this webinar on managing COVID in the community. I'm Dr. Deepak Balani, Chief of Medical Services at Sakra World Hospital. With me are two of my senior colleagues. On my left is Dr. Raghu J, Consultant in Internal Medicine. On my right is Dr. Bevin, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Sakra. The way we propose to go about it is we would each of us give a small brief introduction on some of the general things. It is probably actually public knowledge at the top of everyone's mind today. And thereafter, we would go on to clarifying certain doubts and questions which any of you may have. So just to start off, this is an unprecedented kind of a condition not heard of in modern times and not heard of till late 2019, which is why it has carried this name of COVID-19. The disease is called COVID-19, and the virus which causes it is called SARS-CoV-2, that is SARS coronavirus 2. Now this condition is the virus is actually similar to the viruses which caused SARS and MERS earlier in the past couple of decades. While those were relatively circumscribed kind of conditions in that they didn't spread too far or wide or were not so severe, this one has become global and assumed great proportions, which is what the matter of concern for all of us is. I will move on to Dr. Raghu will speak about the disease, its clinical conditions, and Dr. Bevin will speak about primarily how we could tackle the spread, maybe in hospital circumstances, how we deal with it, and two, in the community, what we could do about it briefly, and then we'll move on to the question and answers. Dr. Raghu, over to you for your take on this.
Good afternoon, folks. So as Sir has told, which is the new disease which we are trying to learn about this disease, symptoms, management, and the vaccines which is yet to come, which is on the process. See, as Sir told, this is caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. That is, normally we call it as a corona. Initially, they used to call it coronavirus disease. Now it has been WHO named it as COVID-19 disease, caused by the SARS-CoV-2 19. That's how the nomenclature has been done. So as you most of them are watching in the nowadays, most of the TV channels, everywhere it has been highlighted, and the symptoms, and it is nothing but a common virus disease, presents with the common symptoms like similar to that of any flu kind of thing. Usually the common symptoms what we see, which normally we see, is that one is sore throat, fever, dry cough most of the time, followed by sometimes the minor symptoms by like the loose motions, abdominal pain, sometimes change in the sensation, then in the tongue as well as in the nose. And of course, it's also associated with the body pain, headache. All these are the common symptoms what we see with the this COVID-19 disease. And there are, it depends on, it may be range from the mild, moderate, severe symptoms. It depends on the individual, those who are those patients who are having with the comorbid conditions like age, risk factors, basically age more than 60 years, like diabetes, hypertension, any chronic renal failure or heart disease, are very much prone to become end up in a severe form of the disease. So usually as you all heard about this one, usually transmitted through the droplets. It is droplets, the respiratory droplets. Mainly it is transmitted through the respiratory droplets from one person to the other person. Unlike other SARS, earlier in the 2003 MERS disease, the spread of the disease is faster than the infectivity rate, what we call it as, is faster than the earlier disease. And moreover, and it is also spreads through the droplets if it is fallen on the any materials, like we call it as a fomites, either touching the fomites and touching the face, nose, ears, and this is how the route of transmission. That is the reason we are all recommending mainly to wear the mask. Second one is the respiratory sanitization. Third one is the hand sanitization. These are the three important things to prevent. As there is no specific treatment, any virus for that matter, there is no antiviral available. Like that, this virus is also, there is currently no antiviral or a vaccination available. So the prevention is the utmost care. That is the hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, and social distancing. These are the three important things which prevents the spread of the disease in the community.
So so what I'm going to speak from is like purely from an organizational point of view as to like what is being done. Now, see, Dr. Raghu, I was finishing off. He said that he talked about how it spreads. One is with regards to droplet infection, respiratory inhalation of those droplets, or those droplets moving from the fomite or the surface down to your face, eyes, nose, etc., where the infectivity will continue being and that, yeah, as he said, the disease has got a significantly more infective potential than most of the other diseases which have been seen in the past, like be it H1N1 or the previous SARS outbreaks. Right. So in that point of view, what are the steps that we are taking? Yes, Dr. Raghu also mentioned about hand sanitization, about keeping yourself healthy and away from contacts, etc. So I'm going to take off from there. I'm just going to tell that, yes, what are the things that we need to look at? I mean, when you're coming to an hospital or when you're coming to a public space, you would have already known that there's a significant amount of social distancing which has been suggested both from a government, and from various sources of information which you're getting. One is social distancing. Secondly is to wear a mask outside all the time. Let me just stress on the importance of the mask here. It's not so much as to prevent the infection from coming through, but rather than you spreading that infection in the surrounding. But it's, if you say that whether it is useful for me or it's not, for me at all to wear the mask, yes, it's a good question. But what I'd say is, if the net total public starts to wear a mask, then the disease is not going to spread as much, right? Because there won't be that many that much of micro droplets would not be in the air, and would make each environment much more safer for anybody to be in. So with that in mind, what we have done in our hospital is we have kind of made sure that the hospital is as clean as possible. Number one, that there is an extensive amount of cleaning and expensive amount of sanitization that is happening in the hospital on a much more higher frequency than it used to happen before. And if we were cleaning once every 2 hours or 3 hours at early date, now we're cleaning every half an hour, every hour. So making sure that the surfaces are kept clear so that any new person coming in over there is not affected. We are maintaining social distance in a very, very strong way in the hospital. We also have created some sort of a system wherein there is a possibility that either person's anxiety, that is either the doctor's anxiety or the client's anxiety, both of them are to be kept in mind, and we are able to do a consultation across in a room wherein it is completely clear. I mean, completely free of droplets, free of any sort of a touch. We have created such kind of cabins on the outside of our hospital, and we'll be able to consult any one of your doctors in those cabins. Also, we have refurbished our entire emergency room. Now you know that the emergency room would receive cases, and we would have to receive the cases immediately from the public by making sure that irrespective of what might be the situation that the patient has and what the potential for infection might be, we have a responsibility to make sure that that patient is taken care of without without them catching the infection in the system, or without that person, in case infected, spreading that infection to anybody else in the hospital or to the patient next to them. So what we're doing is a high degree of segregation has been created within the system. So the whole healthcare unit as such has just changed its orientation from just being how it would be like the general healthcare sort of situation. It has changed to extremely specific, making sure that each person does not have an interaction with somebody else. and that we also are taking extra caution that, like, every time somebody sees one particular patient, they deglove and then they reglove for another patient, make sure that the mask is worn at all times. No common area in this hospital you would find anybody without a mask, okay, except maybe like when they're having something to eat or something like that, but otherwise all the time you would find that everybody is taking those precautions.
So, folks, we have received a set of questions already. Probably we'll go about answering some of them. And in the meantime, if you would have questions, you could go ahead and pass them on. Dr. Raghu, would you want to take any of the questions? We already received a set of 21 questions.
How safe international travel would be for senior citizens and what precautions should they take? See, first of all, I'll answer that question. It's like, yes, see, you have the elderly here in this particular situation, any senior citizen having a travel if they want to undertake, is that the challenges that they will face is, one is the transport, the airport itself, okay? The airport itself is one place wherein the air conditioning which is there in that area, the transport to the airport, all of these factors are one particular challenge. First phase of challenge itself is there. But the chances are high. Like if you see the early stage of this particular outbreak, most of the transport, most of the spread, there's a good lot of spread which would have happened because of airports themselves, because of the kind of crowding that was happening in that area. And now, of course, things have changed and the airports have been sanitized, and there's a good deal of social distancing being maintained, and a lot of processes have been changed to make sure that people are, are well segregated. At the same time, they have a lot of non-touch, no-touch sort of interactions with the passengers or with the crew. So that does make that airport experience fairly safe. As far as the aircraft itself is concerned, the air conditioning in aircraft as well as the filters which exist for microbes within that particular, because it is a closed box anyway. Whoever's you traveled on aircraft, you would know that all the air which is there is recycled. You have basically it's a can full of air in an aircraft, and it's pressurized air. So naturally, there would be the air circulation which is being done inside the air conditioning within the aircraft would be done to a much higher degree, and their filters, if I'm not wrong, are way superior. So besides fomites, the fomites as in like the surface which you touch as well as the things that you might use, like for example, common cutlery or common things where you need to be careful, is that it's not too much of a worry if you're wearing a decent mask. And if everybody else in the aircraft is wearing a mask, there's a good degree of safety there. One. Next is the part of in case, what they should do. What the senior citizens should be worried about here is like just that they should not travel under circumstances wherein they are having any kind of an illness or anything of that sort. So that would be definitely not advised. But if they have traveled and they have come back from an institute, let me start from there, is that if you've traveled and you've come back from a particular area which is like definitely having a higher case load, or you're traveling interstate from one state which has got a higher case load and to another area, do keep an eye on your general health. That is like measure your temperature twice a day. Make sure that in case you're developing any symptoms of this, get yourself tested at the earliest. So that sort of a thing would be recommended from myself. Other than that, I think it should be fairly safe. It's just that you don't have to have too much crowding. So that's why probably the government is not encouraging too many people to travel at the same time. But in the current circumstances, or at least by the data and the way, I've been speaking to other colleagues who are working in these fields, is that they are telling me that there is a good deal of safety which is ensured when somebody takes a flight.
Before we move on to the next question, I will keep passing on some snippets now and then. One is about the clinical profile of the disease. Let's say I have got this infection today. Let's say the typical time period before which I start feeling something wrong with me is typically 5 days. Typically 5 days. It could be lesser, it could be more. But I may start feeling some degree of fever or some degree of breathlessness, cough, dry cough, and cold or sore throat kind of symptom. Typically 5 days is the profile. In most people, it is so mild that you may not pay much attention to it at all. By most, see, statistics say 80%. Now, is it 70%? Is it 90%? Is anyone's guess? Preliminary results have shown 80%. In 20% of the people, they may feel something beyond the normal clearing of the throat and a mild cough or sore throat. And a small fraction of these will actually go on to develop more severe disease. Severe disease is typically in the form of lung involvement and pneumonia. This may make them breathless. And the simplest way of detecting the degree of involvement if someone is feeling a fever or breathless is what is known as pulse oximetry. A pulse oximeter is a small clip-like a thing. It's available on Amazon and Flipkart, as far as I know, to the 1,000 rupees, 1,500 rupees, and so on. It just needs to be clipped onto the finger, and in a few seconds it tells you what is the oxygen saturation. Normal saturation typically is 97% and above, and as age grows, it tends to go down a little bit. So anything below 90 would be significantly abnormal. Anything above 95 on room air is considered acceptable. So that is one means of assessing the severity of this condition. There are other features as well. Let's then try to move on to the next question. Over Dr. Raghu.
How to take care of elders at home, especially with diabetes and heart ailments?
Yes. See, as we already mentioned, one is this virus, the infectivity rate is more in the compared to others SARS. Of course, what we are seeing, the trend, what we are seeing, of course, for any viral disease or any disease, elderly patients with the comorbid conditions like diabetes, hypertension, any heart disease or dialysis patients, of course, even the pregnant women are risk to get the disease, and that is the more severity of the disease will be more. Precautions as per the government norms or what are the norms, always they are trying to avoid the first to isolation in the home, stay in the home first. That is the important message. That's what you are be watching in the TV or government the policies. So first they avoid the going outside, or better to isolate until unless definitely it is necessary to go. First, as Bevin just now discussed, I would suggest to avoid should avoid travel going outside the home. This is a very important, because it is as Dr. Deepak was telling, one is the asymptomatic. 80% of the patients are asymptomatic. We'll be not knowing. The persons will look very normal. So better to avoid the go outside, or better to go outside to anywhere traveling. Prevent that first. Those who are having, especially the diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, so they are very risk, because one is the immunity level is little bit less, and they are very prone. Any small infection, their immunity may be little bit lower compared to the normal other persons, that younger middle-aged persons or younger persons. So the fight against the virus will be with the immunity level. As it is low, it will be less. So the extra precaution is, one is avoid going outside, stay in the home, follow the social distancing. Third one is the hand sanitization. That is the hands, very, very important. Respiratory sanitization, that is the nothing but the wearing the mask, and avoid touching the face, nose, eyes, mouth. These are that when, especially if there is very much necessary to go outside, then wear the gloves, mask, very important. Any mask, even the simple cloth mask will also will, and keeping away at least 1 meter from away from the people, so that and avoid in the crowded area. These are the things to be taken, the precautions. So comorbidities, of course, as I told, that if it is definitely if it is necessary, then only they should visit the either any outside or hospitals or any other. If any strong suspicious, as Sir told, Dr. Deepak, any respiratory symptoms, breathing difficulty, pneumonia, or any other kind of any symptoms which we develop prior followed by the fever, throat pain, cough, any body pain. So if they're after 5 to 6 days, if they're developing any symptoms which is very severe, which is unusual, then immediately they have to visit the doctors, and necessary things has to be taken care, like X-ray or COVID test if it is have any doubt. All these things, the prevention has to be taken. So best thing is that, see, the extra precaution is nothing but to avoid staying in the home is the best thing. Avoid going in the crowded area, avoid going outside. So, and avoid from the people those who are coming from the outside, or traveling from the abroad, or coming from the outside states or outside place which is not. So for example, any in your home, any servants or children or anyone from the family members, if they're try to be away from them. So at least 14 to 14 days, that is the minimum, but sometimes it may extend even up to 21 to 20 or even 1 month also. So the prevention is better than the cure. What we do, mainly the primary thing is that prevention. Still, because as we till now we don't have any vaccination or any antiviral specific medications as they're no available. Is the mainly the important is the prevention.
Going to the next question, related to what Dr. Raghu was saying, is that like, okay, and this question is explain the workflow of what a typical patient has to do. See, now in this particular question, now first one thing that has been created here first is that we'll be able to have a remote consultation, that is through Zoom or whatever the apps may be. It will be possible for you to access a consultation. The details are on our website, and you will be able to access, through a portal, you'll be able to access the Sakra doctor, any of the Sakra doctors for consultation. Should you need to come to the hospital, or the doctor feels that you should come to the hospital to be examined, then if you're having symptoms which are related to COVID, like with fever and things like that, so that sort of a thing can be handled at the fever clinic. Now we have a fever clinic which is set up outside the emergency room, so it is convenient for the patients to access, and a consultation can be done over there, and the required prescription can be received. Next is the part. Now let us say that you have symptoms and you need testing. So the testing is done right next to the fever clinic. That is where the consultation chambers are. Very next to that there is a sample collection unit, which is again completely isolated and cleaned after each patient's entry there. And that's where we can collect the samples, and these samples can be sent to, will be sent to our lab. We do in-house testing, and those results will be available to you at the quickest possible time. That said, how long does a sample usually take? We would say any time is like depending on the time that you're given the sample. It will take you ideally 6 hours. That will be the earliest you can get a sample. You may, and at latest within 24 hours, you'll be able to get your results. Right. Now comes the part about in case you are tested there and you test, what happens after you get tested? After you get tested, there will be, you would have to wait. You would have to wait in the hospital until your report comes. So the earliest possible time that the report comes to us, we will be reviewing, and then we will be either discharging or admitting the case depending on their condition. So let us first of all have that clarity that somebody who's come to the hospital would be suffering from some ailment or the other, and they may require admission depending on their condition, irrespective of whether it is COVID or not. So they will be taken care of as to what their ailment is. COVID testing is just one step in the process. And when that test comes, if that test comes positive, then we are obligated, as per the current norms, that we would have to transfer this patient to whoever is suffering from COVID, who's tested positive for COVID, whether symptomatic, asymptomatic, or primary contact, or as an unknown contact, or anything it might be. We are supposed to refer them to Victoria Hospital. The government will take over at that particular time. Yeah, so that is the pathway in which the this is being taken care of. If you test negative, yes, you would be taken into the hospital, and there will be a mandatory second sample which may be sent at a later date if the doctor sees fit that your treating doctor might feel that there might be need for testing again in case you don't respond to conventional treatment. And in that case, should you test positive again or you test negative again, the decision will be taken appropriately.
So time for another snippet related to testing. Really, what is the sample are we taking? Is it a blood sample? Is it a urine sample? What is it? It is, of course, a respiratory secretion. We use something like a small earbud kind of a thing, and that earbud is passed into the nose. It's not painful, believe me, and doesn't irritate it. It may be tickling in a minor matter, but most people feel hardly anything. It is put into the back of the nose, gently passed back, and turned a little so that the secretions are absorbed by the swab. Another swab is used to take a little bit of secretions from the back of the throat. The whole process may not take more than a couple of minutes at all. And these two swabs are then put into something which is known as the viral transport medium. That means it's a kind of a solution. It's the same kind of solution which is used to test for any common flu as such. And these are then passed under cold storage to the laboratory where further testing happens. Over to Dr. Raghu.
Yeah, the next question here is explain mild, moderate, and severe infection cases.
So already it has been discussed now. Mild is similar to any flu. Simple fever, dry cough, or the simple body pain, headache could be there. Moderate, again, it depends on condition, whether the patient is developing any respiratory problem or any other symptoms. There is a lot of changes, physiological changes will go on. There will be storms of the inflammatory. There will be a lot of inflammation is going on the body, in the body. It is a reactive kind of thing, lot of interleukins, all these things. We call it as a interleukin storms, which can affect the organs. One is the primary, as you always we are discussing, the primary focus of the infection will be the respiratory tract, either upper respiratory tract or maybe the lower respiratory tract, leading to pneumonia. Second one is that it may affect other organs also. Sometimes if the disease in the severe symptoms, the patient may go into like what we call respiratory distress, maybe end up in a, not all patients, only about 5 to 10% of the patients will end up in the ICU, medical ICU. There also some patients only require non-invasive ventilator, means just a maintain the respiration they may go into. Other some percentage of 5% or 2% of the patients may go into severe disease if they develop into the respiratory failure kind of thing, or where there is a congestion of the lungs will be there. So that time they may go into the ventilator kind of thing. That time they may need intubation or maybe the ventilator. Not all patients. So there is again, as Dr. Deepak has told, 80% of the patients are all asymptomatic. Out of asymptomatic, most of the people may not require any treatment at all. It is just a home quarantine, sometimes simple observation, or maybe wherever the government designated hospitals, just maybe the just require the observation till 14 days to 21 days, as an depends on the severity. Mild, this is the mild symptoms. So moderate symptoms, again, they may require hospitalization if they develop simple pneumonia kind of thing, or any other. Some people they develop the skin symptoms also. Some people may develop just a respiratory and fever kind of thing. Some may be develop dehydration kind of thing. Only these are all symptomatic management. Only few percent of the patients, only 5% to, like that's what that we just less than 5% what we tell may require the medical ICU or intensive care unit kind of thing. Treatment is required, where they few of them may require or few may not require, just maybe the simple observation. Of course, again there again lot of the other things are also will take into consideration. It may differ from individual to individual. If the individual is a young person, middle-aged person, it may not require that aggressive treatment. Or maybe if the patient, as we already discussed, comorbid, elderly patients more than 60 plus, or maybe with comorbid conditions like diabetes, hypertension, maybe they may require a little bit more close monitoring. We may require, maybe there are certain medical investigation, blood investigation may require, or if may they develop we may ask them to secondary infection. If they develop any bacterial, we may add the antibiotic. Not always it is necessary. Or maybe it may require the antiviral kind of thing, which is on a trial basis. We can use that. That is only for the life-threatening complication if they develop. Not always it is required. So most of the patients we see now is the 80%. Most of them are asymptomatic only, or very few of them are developing into the very severe form. This is how we can grade it, the severe, depending on there are various clinical features. Also, we have to take laboratory investigations also be there, and how the patient presents, how fast they're ending up in other symptoms. So we have to depending on when they come to the hospital, we see all the parameters and we do grade according to the necessary things. We segregate the patient.
Yeah, with that, I think Dr. Raghu has also covered some of the next question. Basically, it was asking about the treatment related in each of the cases. I think we sufficiently covered that also. The next question, I think Dr. Balani would answer is that what type of testing does SAHPRA do? So RT-PCR or anything, if you can elaborate.
So testing for this condition is of mainly two types. One is genetic-based testing. By genetic-based testing, we mean that the virus is extracted out from the secretion. See, mentioned just briefly that a swab is taken from the back of the nose and the back of the throat. This swab contains secretions. These secretions may contain some cells, some of our body's own epithelial cells, which contain the virus. Now, the virus is extracted from these cells. The genetic material of the RNA of the viruses is extracted, and these are probed for certain specific gene sequences, specific for coronavirus in general and SARS-CoV-2 in particular. And so this is a process known as polymerase chain reaction, in the sense that these sequences are amplified, means replicated. You know, see, 2 to the power of 5 is let me see, 32, and 2 to the power of 10 is you replicate 10 times and you reach 1,000 copies of this. So you do it 20 times and you've done 1 million copies of this. So you get it to a particular volume such that it's easier to detect. And then we pass a probe, which, you know, those gene sequences, a one-on-one correspondence, and the probe latches on to the specific sequence if it is present over there. And if it is present, then we say that, yeah, it is possibly a coronavirus, and then we check for the specific SARS-CoV-2 gene. So that is the process of polymerase chain reaction. Now, polymerase chain reaction is for DNA viruses. This happens to be a RNA virus, so it's called a reverse transcriptase RNA kind of a PCR, polymerase chain reaction. So this is what we have been doing. Now, so apart from this, there is a testing for antibodies. Someone is infected, the body produces antibodies to the virus, and these antibodies are detected. This is nothing new to coronavirus. Really, this is the same thing for most viruses, be it HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and so on and so forth. We can either detect the virus itself, what we call antigen, or its nucleic acid, or we can detect the antibodies or the body's response to the virus. Same is the case here. So RT-PCR is considered the gold standard, because even that within 1 day of getting infected, the RT-PCR can be sensitive enough to pick it up. But is it actually sensitive enough? It depends on the sample we get, really. The test really is considered, theoretically at least, mathematically perfect. But the thing is that suppose I am infected and I am tested, will the sample actually contain the virus? There lies the catch. Depends on the kind, depends on the way the sample is collected and the amount of respiratory secretions in the virus. So empirically or theoretically, 70% is the figure quoted everywhere, is the sensitivity of this test. Specificity means if it is positive, it is positive, it is kind of virtually beyond doubt. But the sensitivity is referred to as 70. That's about the RT-PCR testing. This testing is a slow, cumbersome process and not freely available as yet. But there's another form of testing for the antibodies. This is antibody-based testing. ELISA is one of those. This one is considered to be much faster, can be done at any small labs as well. And the beauty of this is it's a blood test. It does not require some specific collection. The risk to the person who's collecting it is also much lesser. The reports are faster, quicker, and so on and so forth. The problem is that these problem is twofold. One is it depends on the body's response to the virus, which means that if my immunity is poor, I may develop the antibodies later or may not develop it till a long time. On the other hand, if my immunity happens to be a bit stronger, then I may develop it faster. So typically up to 7 days, maybe say an average of 7 days after getting infected, then this test tends to come positive, which means if you test it 5 days after I get infected, the test may actually come negative, which is misleading. So there's a catch in this. This is called a window period. There's a variable window period, maybe 5 days to a little longer as well, when this test may come negative, even though I may be infected. So there's a catch with this test. The other catch with this test is that it is not really available as yet, because initial rounds of the batches which came, the test sample, the testing kits apparently were substandard, and so the government went slow and cautious on testing. And the other thing is that since there's a window period, this test is useful for testing only under certain measured circumstances, maybe on a community level, or maybe to test asymptomatic, which is why you'll find many of these testing protocols recommend testing from 5 days to 7 days and so on and so forth. So these are two kinds of tests. The antibody-based testing, ELISA, so far, my understanding, is not really available in Karnataka as such, except under certain very controlled circumstances yet. Everybody is doing only the polymerase chain reaction, PCR testing. Now, somebody may have heard of something called GeneXpert. Somebody has heard of something called TrueNat. These are all RT-PCR tests only, except that, see, the GeneXpert is an automated one. It's a cartridge wherein instead of going through the manual process of extracting the virus and the DNA from the tissue or material and then amplifying it, centrifuging it, and then passing on the probes and detecting it. See, it's an automated fashion. It's done in a single cartridge. Similarly, TrueNat and so on and so forth. So these are all variants of the RT-PCR method. So SAKRA does have both the RT-PCR methods, the conventional RT-PCR, as well as the GeneXpert RT-PCR.
So when you say rapid testing, you would say that RT-PCR, GeneXpert would be a rapid test?
But by rapid, see, the difference in the testing is the RT-PCR conventional method actually start to end within the lab itself, maybe over 3 or 3.5 hours. On the other hand, the GeneXpert within the lab itself is 2 hours. But see, it takes some time for collecting a sample, going to the lab, running it a batch, getting the report, and so on. So this is not what we mean by a rapid test. A rapid test typically, if you say, is these antibody-based tests. Some of these you can get the report within 15 minutes. Somebody is saying abroad that, okay, you test it, or you do a breath analysis and get in the test. I don't know. We don't know. It's not there in India yet, and these are things to be tested. Okay. And somebody says you drive through, do foo-foo like into an breath analysis and alcohol and get it. Those are the truly rapid tests. But what we really refer to as rapid test today is that the blood test. You draw a sample of blood, test for the antibody, and similar you get the report within a few minutes to an hour. Yes.
But those are evaded in India at the moment, isn't it? Now, there are a few other questions here. So, like, one is asking us, under what circumstance can a COVID positive case do self-isolation at home and be tested? See, to my reckoning, right now, a COVID positive test is receiving institutional care. The government is taking complete control over the case at the moment, because, see, the spread in the community, at least in Bangalore and Karnataka, is not as high as it is in certain other states. So definitely they would like to try to isolate that cohort into one area so that they have complete control on this situation. So now they self-isolation at home, if you have turned positive, is currently not a reality in Bangalore or in Karnataka for that matter. You will receive institutional care, and once 2 of your samples, 72 hours apart, come negative, you would be discharged from that hospital. So right now, yes, there is no circumstance in which you would be doing self-isolation at home. When will that circumstance come? It will probably come when we reach a situation wherein there is so much of caseload that it will not be possible for the hospitals to take the patients in, and it might be advisable that patients, so that the healthcare system doesn't get burdened, it might be possible for they might actually tell people to stay back home and take a bunch of medicines and report for tests on a regular basis. There's another question here. Now, this is a bit of a couple of little questions which are which I don't think we right now have the data to answer, but I think we can at least debate, and maybe that can give us some answer. Why are 80% of India's cases asymptomatic?
No.
Any idea why?
Nothing like that. 80% asymptomatic is throughout the world the same thing.
But
Only,
why
that's what, as we have already discussed. See, most of them are depends on the age, comorbid, and 80% are, most of them are. See, this virus transmits very
young patients.
See, this is transmission rate is very far. I mean, it's very more aggressive than compared to the other SARS. But only the death rate, mortality rate, little less comparatively. But that India, it's of course it's difficult to tell. There are various theories is going on: BCG vaccination, anti-malarial drugs. We are exposed to the malaria already.
Correct.
So all these things. This theory is yet to be proven. There is no control studies or there is no randomized studies. still because it's very new. This is this is started from almost nearly November. This one.
There's a possibility suggested that there could have been a mutation which might have
Mutation,
actually
yes,
caused.
there is a lot of mutation is going on. There are almost circulating like 3 to 4 viruses they are telling. So it depends on the virulence of that particular virus also, and what type of this virus is in the particular community, how it's spreading in that country also.
Yeah.
Of course, they are telling that death rate there in US is more, or Italy is more compared to Indians. Maybe one day thing is that one, they are the elderly population, means the longevity is more compared to the Indians, but middle-aged and younger population more in India, that is there. But we are not, we are trying to see, we have taken the lockdown and everything, prevention, precaution by the government of India, by the state government and all this. So we are we learned, though the disease has come little late, we are taking the more of that like prevention,
Right.
to more aggressively compared to any other countries. But before they realizing, at least we have the data what to be done.
Correct.
So that is the one of the things we can explain.
And so the lockdown might have given us a little bit of time.
Little time, of
Yeah,
course.
to kind
Though
of
the spread is
start.
still there, but it has given some time to take the prevention, then getting equipped with the government and how to educate the people. So through the media and all this, so the people also learned how to means they how to live. This virus is not going to go out of this.
Correct.
At least another 6 to 8 months to 1 year till we get any vaccination or particular antiviral.
Right.
So
I mean, the next another question was, how do we coexist with this illness? Because this looks like it is going to go on for some time. So how do we coexist? And in fact, one gentleman has asked here when will this pandemic end? Until when? How do we coexist? So I think that kind of tells you
Yes,
that.
there's only thing. There's only the prevention, nothing else. One is social distancing, hand sanitization, hand washing, very, very important, and respiratory hygiene. These three only is the only going to prevent. Otherwise, no, till we get any particular, any specific vaccine or specific medicine, antiviral, till that time, we have to be, we have to adhere to this one.
Yeah.
This is not only for this disease, for any disease and any virus for that matter, we have to adhere to this one. Otherwise, no other way. Right. So we have to coexist. This virus will be circulating in the population. It is difficult to eradicate right now until unless we have the antiviral. So only thing is that's what they everywhere, whichever the TV, whichever wherever you discuss, these are the only 3 points. One is that's what, staying in the home, stay away from the crowded area, avoid the unnecessary venturing outside. Second one is the hand sanitization. So washing with soap and water is very, very hard with alcohol rub, which contains about 60 or 70% and above, 70% above the alcohol, and the respiratory hygiene, covering with the mask. And whenever they have the symptoms of for example, cough, sneezing and everything, proper hygiene and all these things has to be taken care. This is how we can prevent and propagation of the virus in the community. This is the only thing at present which is there. We have to coexist with the virus. It will be there. So only thing is that we have to cut the chain.
Correct.
That is very important.
The chain of spreading, or make
Because,
it difficult
yes,
for the virus to spread
from fast.
To put things in perspective, let me say that SARS and MERS disappeared from the face of the earth more or less within 6 months. However, the influenza, which surfaced sometime 2009 or so, is still here with us, still going strong. How is this COVID-19 going to pan out is anybody's guess. All we can say is that there are speculations and there are speculations galore. For instance, this Singapore University of Technology and Design, someone that's the most popular one on WhatsApp these days, or came up with a mathematical model based on the pattern of increase in the cases to suggest that India would be free of this by July 2020. But then we don't know if that's a pipe dream, and or is there or does it hold water really? However, it is clear that the numbers which are coming out positive are increasing at a faster and faster pace, certainly in India. Though for the world as a whole, the number of new cases coming on a daily basis seems to have plateaued. Now, is this temporary? Is it long lasting? Is it because the virus is slowly beating a retreat? Or is it that the measures we are taking are effective? No one seems to really know. But there's an increasing realization that it is here to stay.
I mean, it's like, see, that way you touched upon one important thing. That is, like you said about the progress on vaccines and drugs is is kind of fast these days, as well as that. And along with that, if we can touch upon herd immunity as such, and how it is going to influence the overall, probably the end of this pandemic.
So
I'll just put it. So herd immunity is the one. It is not a new thing for all the disease. It is there already exist. It behaves herd immunities, but for each disease it depends on. But now the current status, what they're telling, we have to reach at least not less than 65 to 70% has to be infected, so that other persons of the who is asymptomatic, I mean those who are not having the disease, may be prevented. That's how they are postulating. But each disease will have the different number. Maybe it's 60%, 50%, like that. But the expectation for this herd immunity, what it may range up to 65 to 70%. Eventually, in the community, see, maybe initially the viral infections, infectivity will be very severe initially, first few initially. Then it go to the plateau and come down. The peak will slowly become. Then there may be on and off small spikes can occur on and off. So like any other viral disease or any other which has been there earlier, which is with the experience of that one, maybe the herd immunity to reach that one. So each individual of that community or particular this group of the people or the community or wherever, so it has to be reached, that is postulated between around 65 to 70%. So eventually it is going to happen, and aggressiveness of the virus and infectivity rate of this one also will come down slowly. But initial period for any virus, any infection for that matter, will be very aggressive. First, at least 6 months to 1 year, it will be aggressive, and slowly it may come down. And that is then the infection rate also will be slowed down. So
no, I'll try to give some gyan to those who may be uninitiated. Pardon if I'm going too basic. But effectively, what really is this vaccines which we are talking about? These are biological materials, and they contain certain components of the virus or the infective agent itself. And when introduced into the body system, the body tends to develop natural innate immunity against this. Now, what is it that we are injecting? Is it a live virus? Is it a component of the virus? And so on. There are all sorts. Effectively, it is some infective material which can cause, which has the antigenicity. That means it can induce production of the immune response, but it does not have the pathogenicity. That means it can cause the immune response, but it cannot cause the disease itself. For instance, let's say polio, oral polio vaccine. That means the drop of life, what we call. This contains some vaccine virus, which is it is live. It's live virus. It's a live polio virus, but it is inactivated. It cannot cause it. It is modified in such a way in the lab that it cannot cause the disease at all. And we go about giving this to babies, periodically, again and again, every year, or even twice a year till the age of 5. Now, what happens really is that the child develops such a mildish form of infection, which does not cause any harm to the child, but actually results in development of immunity. And once this immunity develops on a large scale in the community, then we may find that the virus has no scope to spread at all. And so theoretically, it's a mathematical model, really, depending on the infectivity of the virus and the pathogen. And so for polio, it was kind of assumed that a 90% prevalence of this immunity is enough to prevent the spread of polio. A similar concept seems to be at the back of the mind of most scientists working with coronavirus today. Only thing is this immunity, we are depending on the virus infecting everybody to develop this immunity, rather than having a vaccine which is going to be developing this immunity. In the bargain, people who are getting infected, they're getting infected by a virus which is causing the disease actually. So there's a small difference in this concept of herd immunity between, let's say, polio and COVID-19.
See, on that topic, I feel like just a question to Dr. Raghu. How does one increase their immunity?
There is nothing. See, there are a lot of the myths is going on in that sense. This immunity will be increased only with it's not going to prevent or going to cure the disease itself. It can help to boost the immunity itself. That is the only thing. So increasing the immunity means just taking a good kind of a diet, basically the diet which contains more of green leaf vegetables, which contains rich in vitamin C, and sometimes we propose vitamin D also nowadays. We are telling that one, and of course some of them which contains rich in the zinc also they are proposing. So these are the things. There is nothing that it is going to see if the person is having the disease COVID. It is not going to just taking all these things is not going to cure. No, it can boost up to fight the infection just because of it helps in the increase in the immunity level. Immunity level in the sense it helps in the antioxidant. This contains all contains the antioxidants. Nowadays people use
vitamin C.
yes, vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, then all these things which contains this antioxidant which helps into to fight. That's all. It's not going to cure. A lot of people nowadays we are seeing that when they are taking some there are some drugs which is they're telling that this is if you take this one they will immunity will be improved. No, nothing like that. So it is going to the antibody has to produce, our antibody has to fight with the disease itself. There is nothing this one. Even they are the garlic also they are telling. Then they are telling about turmeric. These all these things. Some people are taking daily turmeric. I have heard some patients taking. It is not going to change anything. It may help. That may contain some antioxidants which can fight against this virus. I don't think so. It is going to help much in the fighting. But of course, we should be healthy. That is, it will help in the antibody production and helps in the antioxidants which can fight. That is the only thing.
Good quantity of macronutrients, that is your
Yes.
protein as well as like supplementary
balanced diet.
Yeah, free oxidant. I mean, just antioxidants which you can take and make sure that all your micronutrients is sorted.
Yes, it is not going to cure. It is not a antiviral. No, there is no antiviral in any of these things. It's only helps in the fighting antioxidants.
So if you get the disease, you're in a better shape too.
Yes, that is the only thing.
So let me say my 2 bits on this. Generally, this coronavirus is just the same virus which can cause minor colds and upper respiratory infection, except that this one goes deeper into the lungs and causes pneumonia, which in a small fraction of people can be fatal. So then how does one prevent a cold? Simple thing is something which mankind has been grappling with for centuries, really. There have been theories, okay, a high intake of, say, vitamin C. Some people say going without sleep or lack of sleep can depress the immunity. So catching a good night's rest ensures that your immunity is relatively better off. Circadian rhythm. True, false is anyone's guess, really. There have been things, okay, how do you prevent it? There was this concept of HCQS, hydroxychloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine is a plant, a cinchona plant derivative, bitter kind of a drug. Quinine, it started off as and got modified into hydroxychloroquine. But and again, does this prevent? There is no concrete objective evidence, but for want of anything better, the government of India has recommended that healthcare professionals likely to be exposed to this virus go ahead and take hydroxychloroquine. It's a relatively safe drug. It is given left, right, and center to patients who have, for instance, rheumatoid arthritis and millions of people who develop malaria to prevent malaria. But does it work in this? Only Dr. Trump can say.
Okay. Right. Okay. The last question which we can touch upon this is like, what? Why? Sorry. If required, is Sakra geared up to do treatment as well? How many isolation beds, ICU beds, ventilators, etc. does Sakra have? Are these dedicated only to COVID patients, or do we have separate AC ducts for the isolation wards and ICUs? How many doctors are available, etc.?
Dr.
Yeah. So I think this question is basically to tell you, yes, we have about 68 beds which have been dedicated for this. See, we are not actively treating any COVID patients, and that I would like to make explicitly clear. Number one. Should the situation come where the government needs to go how the Maharashtra route has gone, basically that they need the help of the private society, we don't want to hesitate at the draw for that. So we have already dedicated a significant amount and done the infrastructure changes that are required to ensure that the patients are going to be taken care of within that area as well as we can. We have approximately 40 ventilators which are available for the treatment of COVID patients, which can be, which can be freed up at a moment's notice to take care of these patients. The next is separate wards and air conditioning. Yes, yes, we have dedicated the topmost floor and the place which is not affecting any other specialty or any vulnerable patient group. We made sure separate lifts as well as separate wards. 2 wings have been dedicated for the treatment, for the receiving and treatment of any patient who could possibly be COVID or could be a suspect. All the patients in that area are isolated from each other, so there is no problem. Even if you were admitted normally in that ward, and the next patient was COVID, you'll still be quite safe, because that is how the segregation has been maintained. Yes, the common areas like emergency, ICU, etc. Particularly emergency, what is being done, because it's a common area and it's a route of entry, there is adequate segregation between each patient has been provided. A single ICU, a particular ICU has been dedicated for the care of COVID, should we have that kind of a load. Now, as of now, yes, we are not receiving any patients, but are we prepared? Completely.
Yes. So I will like to state some general principles in this. Why are COVID patients being treated only at certain hospitals? It may not be a good idea to have COVID and non-COVID patients treated side by side, which is why it's a good idea to segregate out. It is safer for patients who may not be having any features or may not be infected. Yes, which is why the government came to the idea of doing it at Victoria Hospital and Boring Hospital and certain other COVID dedicated hospitals. That said, in any hospital, it always makes sense to separate out patients who clearly have no risk of, which is what we have endeavored to do to ensure a very, very safe environment to patients who are nowhere in any way COVID at all. We have segregated it out very, very neatly. The staff are separate, their meals are separate, their waste is handled separately and much more intensively as well. And we have tried to say that they are safe from the next patient as well. So these are separate rooms with a negative pressure. That means the air gets ducted out directly into the atmosphere. Even the air from next room does not come in. And the patients and the clinician nurses, change their gloves before going into the next patient and so on. So to the extent possible, we can say that there's a safe environment, be it a non-COVID routine patient or a COVID or a COVID likely kind of a patient. However, only time will tell if what we have been doing is going to prove adequate. Thanks a lot, folks, for joining in on a Saturday afternoon. And I hope this has been of some benefit to you. Hope to catch up with you all in further such sessions in the future. You could be welcome to connect with us at SAKRA in case you have any further questions. This is at care@sakraworldhospital.com, care@sakraworldhospital.com, or you could also call up on our phone numbers. That's 080, which is the Bangalore STD code, 4969-4969.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all for being here. Once again, I would just request you to, at the end of this survey, at the end of this discussion, please fill up the survey form after this session. And yes.
And we are prepared for all the things, and all the OPDs is also running as usual with utmost hygiene, social distancing and everything. And I think we have restarted also the health checkup also. That is also important. So we are prepared for all the separate wards, separate investigations, and we have a separate porta caps kind of thing to interrogating the patients, and all the necessary precautions are also we have taken in our hospitals. So anytime any doubts, you can always have a discussion with either with any Zoom calls or anything like that.
Yes,
you can take that.
We are always available. You can
video consultation is also available.